people listening to this who want to become more of a real-time business, what I would suggest you start with is saying, what would be a home run on an integrated customer experience for us? And what would be a home run on a high quality employee experience? And what would be a home run on simplifying the way we run ourselves?
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Peter Weill. Peter is a world-renowned strategic thinker, acclaimed author and speaker who advises executives and boards with evidence-based insights on how to thrive in the digital era and create exceptional enterprise value. Peter's a faculty member of the MIT Sloan School of Management, serving as senior research scientist and chairman at the MIT Center for Information Systems Research, or CISR, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary. He's been the chairman of MIT CISR for half of that time. He's also a senior advisor to Insight Partners, the largest venture capital firm investing in software companies. Peter, welcome back to Technovation. It's great to speak with you again.
Thanks, Peter. Great to see you again. How you been?
I've been well, thank you. And you?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm in Melbourne, Australia, so greetings.
Yeah, wonderful. Good evening to you. It's morning here in the U.S. where you'll be soon, I know. And you got a little bit of you'll be where the background is currently for those who can see this at MIT. But I wanted to get into your research, Peter,
Yeah.
some of your latest research. We've corresponded about some of the fascinating research that you've done on real-time business. And I'd love to dive into this topic a little bit more. This will be known by some who are listening, certainly esoteric for others, I would imagine. Maybe just for some context setting, you can define the term real-time business. What is that?
Yeah, sure. Peter, as you know, and you and I are, aligned on this. We've spent most of our careers trying to understand how to run companies better using technology. And so we have seen in the last few years just a radical increase in spending on digital transformation, now on AI, Gen AI. And so what we wanted to ask in this research, which we did in partnership with Insight Partners, was what's next? So yeah, technology is really important, but in the end, it's what new business value can we enable? So we talked to a lot of people, and what came out was the idea, what if we could run a company that was in real time, that onboarded customers in real time, that made decisions in real time, that managed risk in real time, that serviced them in real time, that helped employees do their job in real time, and even free up some of their time to innovate. So in classic research style, we measured nearly 275, more than 275 companies globally on how real time they were. And so that's what we mean by real-time business. And it turns out that the top quartile of those companies way outperform the bottom quartile, nearly double the profit and over 60% more revenue growth. So that's the biggest delta I have seen in my career. On when we measure, one or two things and see what the impact is, that's so I'm completely convinced this is a very important opportunity. And so I look forward to digging in with you about how to make it happen.
Well, without further ado, I'd love to hear just that, Peter. What are some of the, generally speaking, and I'd love to get into specifics in some of the companies I know that you become more intimately knowledgeable of and involved with, but talk a bit about some of the ingredients to being a real-time business.
Sure. Yesterday, I was in Sydney and did a presentation to 200 CIOs at the Adapt CIO Edge conference, a great meeting. And then I did a 45-minute workshop at the end of the day with 50 CIOs to sort of dig into where are they now, how big a lift is it for them to get from what they do now to real time. So we're really getting a sense of what it's going to take. What was obvious was that everybody got it right away. That and it comes down to just one thing. Customers and employees are much happier if they get an answer in real time. I mean, just think about your own lives, right? I just had an experience recently where unfortunately scamming is the new plague, right? And so I just got my credit card got scammed, and Chase Visa contacted me in real time with a text and said, "Did you spend X at this retailer?" I said no. They said, "Okay," canceled your credit card, generated a new credit card, and literally within 20 minutes, that number was in my Apple Pay to be able to use it again. That is the kind of real timeness that we're come to expect. And so that's, I think, the goal. And so you were asking about what does it take? It's really four things. It takes really good, trusted data that is accessible by every person and machine that needs to make decisions. But it's not the data itself that creates value. It's the real-time decisions that sit around the data. So that credit card company had my spending habits. They knew I didn't usually go to this store. And so they were able to identify a scam and make the decision in real time, verify it with me, and then act with a new card. So as we think about what's the tech that's going to make that happen, it's getting the data into the cloud. Almost all the companies that are in the top quartile of our real-timeness had most of, I'll come back to the most, a good part of their data in the cloud. And then they use technology to make decisions. So many of them using traditional AI, machine learning, and now wrapped with Gen AI to talk to us, so to have that conversation. So we're seeing that's the core. And then think of that as the rotor of a helicopter that drives the lift. And then the three blades that create the real lift are better customer experience, easier employee experience, and agile business operations, in particular governance, and the ability to sort of sense and respond to new opportunities. So those three things start to create value as the helicopter blades spin. And the surprising lesson we learned is you don't have to have all your data, even most of it. What you have to have is enough trusted data to enable those three things in an easily accessible place, typically enabled by APIs. And then what happens is those blades start to spin and you see improved performance, better confidence, and the helicopter lifts. We put more data in there, we use better technology to make decisions, and this thing gets faster and faster and faster. And so the top quartile of companies that do those four things had 97% higher profits, industry adjusted, in their same industry than the bottom quartile, and 62% higher growth. So when you step back from that and you say, how could it be so big? Well, it turns out that we, in companies that don't operate in real time, we relitigate decisions over and over, right? We argue about the data. We have paper processes. We make it hard for our employees to do their job, to find the expert. And so those are the reasons we see that big difference. Does that surprise you, that size of difference?
I mean, it is perhaps a bit surprising. I mean, as you describe the rapidity with which organizations can make decisions and do so in a way that everyone's pushing in the same direction, perhaps as that's revealed further, it's a little bit less surprising. But that certainly is a remarkable difference relative to industry competitors.
It is, and you make a great point that you have to be able to see what's happening. And so many of the companies that are in the top quartile use dashboards. And one of my favorite examples of this is Schneider Electric, a company you know well. They have created energy efficiency as a service, where using a IoT infrastructure called EcoStructure. They connect to the heating and cooling and controls in their customer's building, and in real time manage the energy efficiency. To run that across many, many, many customer sites, they have a dashboard that they call the digital flywheel that measures the value created by their EcoStructure. And it has four important measures. And in fact, one of them is the number of connected devices in the customer's offices so that they can measure that in real time. And what makes it so interesting is it is connectable to any hardware, not just their own. So it's agnostic to hardware, and so it can manage that in real time. So a person who works for Schneider can see the value created in real time, and that is so they can course correct. And now they offer that to clients. So one of the big hotel chains uses their Schneider screen in every hotel to measure energy efficiency in real time. So that's the kind of value we can create. And the customers of Schneider that use this EcoStructure offering on average save 30% in their energy costs. So we're talking about real numbers here.
And a fascinating example, in as much as this is a discipline that for some organizations, Schneider Electric being a prominent example that you just provided, can productize these advantages, can parlay perhaps what first works well for them, and then think about in some cases, surely not all, of course, but in some cases, the market opportunities to extend this beyond the four walls of the organization.
I'm so glad you picked up on that, because in another project that Stephanie Warner at MIT and myself are doing, we've been looking at platform models. And one of the highest, most successful platform models is what we're calling X as a service, where you take what you're great at internally and sell it as a service. So one of the banks in Australia, for example, ANZ has a 50% market share in AML as a service. And so anti-money laundering as a service. And so those are examples of taking what you do well in real time and then selling it on. It's a really good topic to come back to, because I think we're going to see it as companies start to separate based on their real-timeness and the use of technology. Those top performing companies will have an opportunity to sell services to others.
Keen insights, Peter. Very, very interesting. You mentioned earlier that doesn't require that all data be in the cloud. That finding high quality, I think, is the way you qualified it, data, and then building some success, and then expanding that beyond that. Talk a little bit about that. That might be also a surprise to some, that it doesn't require the climbing the full mountain from the get-go in order to garner some of the benefits of what you're describing.
So, yeah, thank you. And let me do that, and then I'll illustrate it with the United example that you and I talked about for this session. One of the things we looked at was whether companies who had all their data or who were very sophisticated at having real-time data did better. And it turned out they did worse. So it means that they've spent too much time and money getting their data perfect and getting all of the data into the cloud. So instead, focusing on the three blades, and I'll go through them again: the integrated customer experience, multi-product, multi-channel, high quality employee experience, making it easier for our employees to do their job, and business agility, particularly governing large projects, not having a lot of governance overhead, the ability to sense and respond and make changes. So empowering your people. And so having the data focused on that was the best place to start. So people listening to this who want to become more of a real-time business, what I would suggest you start with is saying, what would be a home run on an integrated customer experience for us? And what would be a home run on a high quality employee experience? And what would be a home run on simplifying the way we run ourselves? And what data would we need to make that happen? So you can imagine, Visa and Chase, the example I gave earlier, thinking about how could they make that real-time fraud thing work, and so what data would they need? So which of the customer journeys do you want to focus on? Which of the employee journeys do you want to focus on? That's where I would start.
That's great. And as you noted, probably a good point for us to talk about the United example that you've referenced. I'd love to have you dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Jason Birnbaum and the team at United. They co-authored the briefing you saw with us, and it's very gratifying when the case study that you are doing together, the person who was responsible, the CIO, said, "Well, let me do it with you." So I met Jason at an event, an inside event, and I presented this research. And he got up halfway through and said, "That's our strategy." And so that's how this case study was born. And it's a really interesting example. And we'll take a little bit of time to go through it, if that's okay. So
Please do.
they put significant investment into centralizing their data into the cloud to provide analytics and insights to their customers and to their employees. So that's the kind of core of the helicopter rotor, but it doesn't create value in itself. And so they said, what are the real-time decisions we can add to that to create value? And one of the first and most significant is something they call Connection Saver, which is an analytic tool that runs all the time and looks across the network and says, how many of our customers are going to miss their connections flights based on current schedules? And what if we held this flight for 5 minutes and this one for 10? Could we save a lot of angst? And so then that's proposed, and the people in charge say, yes, we'll do that. And that happens 24/7. And so that idea that you can have the data, in their case, key data on where their planes are, what the weather is, what are the delays, and then what's the trade-off? And this is why it's so interesting of, can we save some people missing their connections while holding up others for 5 or 10 minutes, which people don't usually mind. And so that's a really good example of how to take the real-time data and then turn it into decision making. And then on top of that, so that's the rotor, and then they had the 3 blades. And so in the case of their integrated customer experience, they have an app that won the best app in the world. I think it was, or was it the US? I think it was the world last year. And 85% of their customers use the app while they're traveling. So they have a real-time connection to the customers. And so they've been working really hard on moving from empowering the customer, to see where their bags are, to make changes, to predicting. Because they think that's the next big thing, to say, okay, look, we see a storm coming, you're going to miss your connection, let's put you on another one, or your bag didn't make it, or we see you take this flight regularly, here's an offer. And so they had a lot of success with that, because it's, traveling, as you well know, can be stressful when stuff goes wrong, right? And so there's nothing more reassuring than someone reaching out and saying, hey, we feel your pain, here's a solution. So that's the customer experience, the first blade. The second is high quality employee experience. And this one really resonated with me. What they found was they created an app for the flight crew and for the cabin crew. And that app gets data before customers do of changes. So if there's weather or if there's traffic congestion or stuff like that, the people on the plane get the information first. And so when a customer is very anxious and has a problem to solve and contacts, a cabin crew and says, hey, they can see it and they can offer a solution. And using their own analytic tools, they found that customers are so much happier if they get their answer in real time than even if they get a much bigger comp compensation 3 or 4 days later when they have to call the call center and, wait to chat. And so they've really invested heavily in empowering their employees to be heroes and to be able to improve the experience. And the numbers are amazing. Their NPS last year, Net Promoter Score, United, was 51. The industry average was 26. So that's huge, right? That's kind of getting up there towards the Amazon kind of numbers. And that's about making their employees the heroes. So I love that idea. And I think that there's a lot more we could do with that. And then the third part, which I think many people listening to this conversation will resonate with, is how do we make things simpler and faster in running our companies? So one of the things that United did was they said, we're going to take our big projects that, for example, one of the big projects they're doing at the moment is a new ticketing platform. And we're going to break the project into modules. These are complicated projects. We're going to break them into modules. We're going to get approval for the project. And then we're going to meet each module. And then once that module is completed, we'll have a very quick conversation, usually less than an hour, and they move on to the next module. So the goal is not to have a heavy governance overhead that slows down the projects. Also gives confidence to the people running the project so that they can do good deals with their suppliers and their partners. And so they've really focused on running the whole company like that, saying breaking these big projects into modules that don't require massive re-governing or governing every time. And so if you sort of step back from that, you see the real-time data enablement, driving real-time decisions, enabling those three capabilities: integrated customer experience, high-quality employee experience, and business agility. And so one of the consequences of that is last year, 2023, they outperformed the industry on both revenue growth and margin by multiples. And so, it's a really interesting example in an industry that's kind of a complex one, right?
To say the least. And I love that the example is United. I mean, in an industry by some metrics that has since the day of the Wright brothers barely created a profit in aggregate, that it's an organization in that industry with the complexity you noted that's able to have such outsized performance based on implementing some of the ideas that you've described. I wanted to ask, have you diagnosed, Peter, what the limiting factors are for, beyond some that we've talked about, for companies that attempt this? I mean, part of what we're talking about is process and technology change. There's also a cultural change element, it strikes me, to something like this as well. And those can be difficult at times. It takes appropriate leadership and guidance and communication and change management. But I wonder, are there any other sort of limiting factors, those and others, that you would particularly underscore?
How do I say this politely, Peter? It requires a mindset change and a confidence in your employees that they can make empowered, and your technology, that they can make empowered decisions without going up and down the organizational hierarchy. We don't have time anymore to go up and down the organizational hierarchy to make approvals. But to do it, we have to have confidence in our people and in our governance guardrails and our technology to do it. And the only people that tend to have confidence in the technology are the digital savvy leaders who really get it. Now, they understand the risks as well, right? And so one of the limiting factors is you need a very digitally savvy top management team and board to make this happen. And you need a very integrated IT organization that has the confidence of the rest of the colleagues to bet the business on real-time operations. So I would say that the most important thing is creating trust. in the data, in the processes, and in the technology. And things will go wrong, right? So learning from that and fixing it is the most important. Just for you, Peter, because I know you'd be interested in this, I brought along the results. We ran a series of regressions underneath each of those four major capabilities I just described to see what were the things that enabled it. So I'll only do one of them because there's quite a lot of factors. But if you think about the rotor, the data in the middle, there were 5 things that were statistically significant that drove being successful at having real-time data for decision making. And the number one factor was enabling core capability access with APIs. It was the most important factor, a factor you and I have talked about for as long as I can remember. But the second one, which is very interesting, is the more full service customer offering the company offered, the more important and enabled was the data, because you were able to get across multiple channels and multiple products the customer's experience and be able to track the journey. When customers had to bounce all across the silos of a company, we couldn't capture that, right? We couldn't capture their experience. The other 3, I'll just mention them: reuse, being able to reuse platforms; partnering, the companies that were really good at real time shared real-time data with their partners. And that's got some risks with it, right? And trust issues, and the partners have to respond. But the supply chain and partners can see the bumps along the road coming, and they can respond to it. You have to do it. And lastly, analyzing employee journeys. And one of my favorite examples of that is the DBS Bank in Singapore, top performing bank in the world most years. They analyze, and one of the things they did several years ago was they analyze how much time they saved every year for customers doing business with the bank. And they reported that in their annual report. And then they said, oh, we should do that for our employees as well. So they analyzed how much time they saved in their employees' journeys. And so those are the kinds of focus areas that enable the real-time data.
Again, compelling stories, and fascinating to hear more about these organizations that have done this so effectively, and some of the key factors that have been the determinants of success. With the advances in artificial intelligence, and especially in generative AI, I wonder what comments you have about best use of this. There's the broad AI, which I think has largely been the subject of when you've been mentioning AI, the broader analytical artificial intelligence. I wonder how advances in generative AI are impacting some of these ideas to a greater extent.
We're just starting to see it. One of my good buddies, John Sviokla, describes generative AI as basically computers talking to you. And I think it's a great analogy, right? So we have traditional AI that does the analytics, but now we have a way to communicate. And so we haven't seen a lot of examples yet of generative AI in real-time business. But if you want me to sort of bring out the crystal ball, where it's going to make a huge difference is in 2 areas. One is enabling the customer to have a richer conversation with the organization via technology. These bots today are still pretty clunky. And so as they get better and more informed, we're going to really make it better to analyze through a AI bot channel than wait 30 minutes for a person, and who still has to figure it out, right? So I think that customer experience in real time is going to be huge for generative AI. But I also think using generative AI to find opportunities in the organization where improvements could be made. Because one of the things we're seeing generative AI being very helpful with is analyzing company documents. So the answers are in there somewhere, but they're not accessible, right? And so I think that's another area we're going to see generative AI. And I was talking to a radiography company, and one of the things the CEO said to me was, "We already use traditional AI to read the films and the scans from MRIs. We always have a doctor review, and we've used traditional AI to do that. But now we use generative AI to write the letter to the doctor, to the patient, and they're really good at writing them." Not all doctors are good at writing letters, right? And so I think that's what we're going to see.
Very interesting. And so much of what you're describing, Peter, I can see the sanctity in your mind and in the research is telling you of the partnership between people and machines, that this is a partnership that is accretive and one that organizations need to invest in, that the decisions are better when made in concert between the two.
Agreed. And one of the really interesting results from this study was that the companies that were in the top quartile of real-timeness also had 20% more revenue from innovation, 20% more revenue from new products introduced in the last 3 years. That's how we measure innovation. And the reason for that's really simple. We freed up people to be innovative, to understand how to improve things by automation, by simplification, by having real-time data to identify problems that were coming up. So not only do we improve customer experience, but we improve innovation. And what I worry about, and just sort of philosophically, it's a bit like the difference between rich and poor in the US today, or in other countries, right? It's getting more so. And it's because the rich have more opportunities. And so they get better and better and better. And we're starting to see that with companies as well. And so I guess the takeaway from this is you can't get too left behind on things like, and I'm not as focused on the technology, on becoming real time, because I think customers will very quickly determine who's more real time and therefore satisfactory.
Yeah, another thing that comes to mind, I was preaching for a long time, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even with the emergence of digital native organizations that rethought customer experience in the digital world, that the residue of that experience for all of us who used a Netflix or Amazon or Facebook or the like on the digital immigrant organizations, companies born before the digital age, just the residue of that experience impacts what we favor, what we don't, right? Even if it's a very different company, the fact that it's not as easy to do business with means that it's going to feel clunky. It's going to be dissatisfying, even if they have, there's been no erosion in the way that they alone have done business. It's that other experience that impacts this. And it strikes me, Peter, that a lot of what you're describing is the same sort of thing. If you have that kind of an experience with the United Airlines, to go with the example from earlier, well, then if you go with another airline that is not providing that same level of real-time information, satisfying your needs and even correcting issues before you know that they are issues, then the residue of the experience with one is going to impact the other. Fair hypothesis?
It does, and it resets expectations. It's why we see big changes in NPS, because people say, well, that's not as good as my experience on Netflix or my iPhone or United or whatever, right? And so, and employees are equally, frustrated. I had a blood test today at a hospital, and the nurse who took the blood had to write on the vials all my details 5 times over because there was 5 lot of blood. And I said, wait a minute, you've got all my information and you've got these sticky. And she said, I know. we don't have it. And then she ranted, right? And said how much time of the day she spends writing on vials, right? So employees get frustrated with that, and they don't have the time to innovate. So, Peter, I thought we should finish to talk about one of your and my favorite topics, which is what's the role of boards in all this?
Indeed.
Because uh, I've spent a lot of time with boards of companies, and we have a big program every year, several times a year in MIT, 3-day program. Next one in November on campus, becoming a more digitally savvy board member. And Stephanie Warner and I have measured the digitally savviness of boards. We first did it in 2019, and actually that was a real wake-up call for me. We were able to measure the digital savviness of every director on every board listed on stock exchanges in the United States. That, over 25,000. We'd never been able to do anything like that before, and we used machine learning to do it. Right, so that was in 2019 was my first experience to say, hey, my job is going to be completely changed. We're going to be able to do things that we couldn't even do before. And what we found was that only 24% of companies had digitally savvy boards, and those companies performed 30% better on just about everything you care about: market cap, growth, profit, ROA, revenue growth. But what was interesting was it required 3 digitally savvy directors to be a digitally savvy board. And as you think about real-time business, it makes sense, because becoming real-time business has some risk associated with it, right? You could make bad decisions in real time, right? You could have cyber issues. There are all kinds of risks. And so this number of 3 directors, when we did the analysis and we found companies with just 1 digitally savvy director, there was no statistical difference in performance, and same for 2. But when we got to 3, it really popped. And so I interviewed a bunch of chairs about why that was. And one of the chairs said to me, and I'll never forget it, he said, "Oh, Peter, we got a first digitally savvy director and we patted ourselves on the back and said, that's great. But we didn't listen to anything they said." And then we got 2. And he said, well, we found they just talk to each other in a language we didn't quite completely get, right? It wasn't until we had 3 and they sat on all the key committees that it really made a difference. And we hear about that kind of magic of 3 to tango. It takes 3 to tango, not just in technology, but in all kinds of diversity issues. So fast forward to 2024, we measured it again. And the digital savviness of boards has really increased. It's over 70% now. And you don't see a big difference in performance. Based on the same metrics we used in 2019, we applied them in 2024. But of course, we've raised the bar. So now when we did it in 2024, we redid it with generative AI, with climate tech and reg tech and all the other technology changes that we're seeing, and it dropped back to 26% of boards. And again, we saw a big difference in performance. So the lesson learned here is it'll take, to become a real-time business will require not only a digitally savvy management team, but also a digitally savvy board. And the bar is continuously rising. So your job and my job is to help everybody, but boards in particular and C-suites, do that improvement every single day. Because without it, we're going to see these big differences between top and bottom quartile.
Very interesting, and I just want to make sure that I'm clarifying one thing. By the way, it harkens back episode 508 that we did together of Technovation, where you went into great detail with the original research. Was one of the most listened to of that year. Just a phenomenal interview for those who want to dig back into the history of
I
some
don't
of this
believe you
analysis.
remember the number, Peter. That's impressive.
But I wanted you mentioned that when you take into consideration Gen AI, reg tech, climate tech. then this drops down a bit more. I just wanted to make sure that I understand that. So when
Yeah.
you diagnose not just general savviness, but the specifics of what that savviness is garnering, or the degree to which the board, the executive team, the technology leadership are pushing in the direction of adopting these sorts of technologies, that it's those that are less adoptive of progressive technology of one sort or another, modern technology, where the bar drops. Is that what that's telling you?
That's the result of it. What we
Mm,
measure is the digital savviness of the directors.
yes.
And we do that by looking at their bios and looking for keywords. And so when we did the 2019 analysis, the keywords were digital transformation, were improving customer experience with technology, apps, tech committees, IT reliability, that sort of thing. And we used the same keywords in 2024, and the percent of boards that were on top of that with 3 members went from 24 to 72. But in 2024, we also ran that new analysis where we added all those new things. So AI, of regular AI, and it's funny we talk about regular AI, right? Machine learning, Gen AI, but also reg tech, climate tech, data liquidity, some of these new things that are important. It drops back to 26% of companies, and we see a performance difference again. So the result of it, I think, is what you just said, is that you end up with more aggressive performance towards using technology.
Yeah. And what do you
And
see? Please.
sorry, go ahead.
No, 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 please, Peter. I'm sorry to cut you
No,
off.
go ahead. I had a final thought, but I'll come back to it.
Okay, please put a pin in it. I was going to ask you the role that tech and digital executives play in all of this. Of course, the influence of the board is known, and I'm not saying it's by any stretch of the imagination a replacement for that. But the role that great technology and digital executives play in being the educators of at least of the rest of the C-suite, because you're talking about a digitally savvy executive team as well, and a portion of that presumably comes from a great consultative nature, a great education that's provided advisory quality to those who run tech and digital. And I wonder if there are any factors you would underscore in terms of those tech and digital leaders who are the better or best amplifiers of the art of the possible with technology.
Yeah, it's such a great question. The role of the CIO is constantly evolving, and you've done much to help CIOs understand what that should be. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Uh, we we measure how CIOs, tech leaders in general, spend their time. And it's a 4 bucket model, and we've done this with many CIOs, color coded their diary and then analyzed. And the 4 buckets are running the IT organization, working with their peers to educate, to inspire, to help, to strategize, to do M&A and all that stuff, right? The second is working with customers to help them better use the company's products and services. There's more and more. And then to do a complementary activity outside of the core IT organization. So it could be running a digital product P&L. It could be running ops. It could be lots of things. And so we published a briefing on that, and we can send you a copy of it. And what we found is that that role of educating and working with peers is critically important. And the good CIOs, the ones that were top performers, spend much less time running the IT organization than they had in the past. When we did this analysis many years ago, the average top performing CIO was doing around 45% of their time running the IT organization. Now it's 20 or 25%. And so they have a good team, but it's those 3 other things that create the real value. And we have a lovely profile of Gail Evans, the CIO of Disney Parks. And she talks about how she spends her time, which is very similar to what I just described, and how one of the things they focus on is the is the visitor experience, the person who visits the park. And so it's a great read, and it's on our MIT CISR website. So please come and have a look at it. And while you're there, celebrate with us our 50th anniversary in October. We're going to have a big party to celebrate being 50 years young.
Wonderful. Gosh, congratulations on that, Peter, and the remarkable work that you and the rest of your CISR colleagues have done to advance all the thinking associated with technology and digital across the landscape around the world. Really, I'm such a great
Thanks,
admirer and count myself very lucky to have gone from someone who has admired you from a distance to now being able to call you a friend. I really appreciate the great work that you and your team do.
Thank you, Peter. And despite appearances, I haven't been there the whole 50 years, so, so we're going to celebrate the first 25 as well. But, one of the things I've learned, Peter, is that, we want to rise everybody's performance. We want to improve everybody's performance. And it's our work, it's your work, it's Jason Birnbaum's work at United, Herbert Curiel at Schneider Electric, that we learn from it. And the generous people who share their insights and time with you and I so we can analyze it and share it again, they're the ones I'm very grateful to as well.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful for this conversation, Peter. Thank you again for making time for our audience and sharing some of your insights and some of the remarkable research you and your team have done. It's been a great conversation.
Right. Hope you can join us for our 50th party.
I'll look forward to it.
Thanks, Peter.